Thanks, Dan. So hello, welcome everybody to today's session, which is supporting your students applying to HE. So Dan and myself, we're both higher education progression advisors with HEPSI, and the outcomes of today's session is we're going to be helping you understand the key dates and entry requirements for university applications. We're going to help you supporting your student know what goes into crafting a strong personal statement, and also appreciate the role that predicted grades play in university applications. Okay, so we're going to start off with a little quiz and looking around key dates. So if I could invite you please to type into the chat, or if you're joining us with the recording, maybe just take a moment and consider what your response may be to the question you see here. So when is the latest a student can submit a UCAS application for the 2023-24 entry? So do you think it is A, the 25th of January, B, the 23rd of February, C, the 30th of June, or D, the 21st of September? So if I could ask you to pop that in the chat there, that would be great. So I can see we've got a mix of responses there in the chat, some going for D, some going for C there. So if we just reveal. So it is actually D, the 21st of September. So sometimes this can kind of throw people a little bit. So the 25th of January is what they call the equal consideration deadline. So that's the date by which your students need to get their application in so that it is considered to be on time, and the universities will, still consider it till that time. The 23rd of February on there, that is for when UCAS Extra opens. So as you'll be aware, if your students have used all 5 of their course choices and they're not in receipt of any offers, then they are eligible to apply for UCAS Extra from the 23rd of February. The other date we'd put on there maybe is a bit of a red herring, was the 30th of June, and that's actually the last date that students can submit their application with choices. And the 21st of September, this is actually the last date that they can submit for this next UCAS 23 cycle before clearing starts, before it actually stops at the end there. So as I say, as much as we kind of focus on that equal consideration deadline, many students will now make what we might call sort of late applications. So it could be that they apply after that date. But, they can still have their application considered after that time. So it's sort of encouraging students, whilst obviously we want them to try and get it in by the 25th of January, they can still make those applications afterwards. Okay.
Wonderful. So let's just make sure. So we're just going to have a look at the key dates. So as Sarisa just said, that very latest a student could submit an application is in September time. The dates we tend to focus on, though, are the ones that we'll show on the screen now. So the 6th of September 2022 is the earliest a student can submit an application for 23 entry. We don't expect many students will be ready to submit on that date, but that's the earliest they can do so. The 15th of October is that early deadline. So there's medicine, dentistry, veterinary science, Oxford and Cambridge applications all need to be in by that date. And then the on-time application deadline, the one that students usually talk about meeting, previously has been the 15th of January every year. It's now going to be the last Wednesday in January every year. So that date will move around ever so slightly each year. Next year, it's the 25th of January that students will need to have that application finished by. Obviously, students will make that application through UCAS. And as of yesterday, the UCAS hub for 2023 applications has gone live. So students can use the hub to explore their choices, they can research courses, they can calculate their tariff points. So you can see from the screenshot on the screen, there's lots of different things they can explore in that hub. As of yesterday, they can now start their 2023 application. So while they can't submit it until the 6th of September, they can start work on that. So they can start filling in their details, filling in their education history, getting all that admin bits out the way now, before they may be ready to, finish that personal statement and finish those choices. So lots of things that students can already be working on. We're going to start and look at what entry requirements might look like. So entry requirements are obviously a crucial part of what a student is going to be looking at when they're doing their research into their course choices. They're going to need to be looking at entry requirements that are within their reach and that aren't sort of out of their reach. So we want them to be aspirational entry requirements in terms of grades, but things that are also realistic. And there's lots of things that can make up entry requirements that are above and beyond just their grades, and particularly just their level 3 grades. So in terms of some of the things that entry requirements will include, we've got UCAS points or grades. So if you're not familiar with UCAS points, every grade a student gets in a level 3 qualification is equated into a certain number of points. Some universities will use that as a way so that students can see that BTECs, A-levels, other vocational qualifications are treated the same, and students can see what that looks like, and so they can be really clear, particularly if they're doing a mix of qualifications, what they might need to secure that. Within that, there may well be specific subject requirements that students need to meet. So certain courses will require that you've done, for example, if you want to do engineering, quite often there will be a need that you've done maths at A-level for that. For some courses, particularly vocational ones, things like nursing, things like teaching, then very may well be work experience requirements that students need to meet. Some institutions will put a limit on that or an amount they expect. Some might just expect they've had some form of experience. Admissions tests, so we talked about that early deadline. Most of those early deadline courses will require you to do an admissions test. And then some additional ones as well. So things like submitting a physical or online portfolio of work. If you're applying for an art-based course, highly likely that a student will need to do that. If they're looking at a more practical course like drama or music, it's highly likely they'll be invited for an audition and will need to pass that to gain access to the course. For some of the health-based courses, so things like where you're working with the general public, there may well be health requirements, may well be requirements on your fitness to practice. And then, let me just nip back. Those practical requirements, so potentially something like a driving license or a DBS check, again, if you're working with vulnerable people on your course, or the driving license one for something like paramedic science, quite often those courses expect you to have that driving license because that's a key part of that role. So just some sort of key points when we think about entry requirements. Some courses are incredibly specific when it comes to entry requirements, and often students can be caught out. And so students need to be aware of all of those entry requirements that courses have, and not just those headline level 3 grades. It's important to be aware when certain entry requirements must be met. So this only really applies if a student is potentially resitting a GCSE qualification. Some providers, some courses will expect them to have those qualifications at the point of application. So if they're still resitting a GCSE, it may well be that they can get caught out by that terminology. And in particular, students should contact universities if they're unsure about any element of requirements. Universities are generally very open and transparent when you contact them about entry requirements. So if students are unsure, encourage them to contact or contact them with them. Just to highlight an example, myself and Cerise have both worked in sixth form colleges, and often the thing that students get caught out about is when a provider says they accept BTECs, but then they request that there is an A-level alongside that BTEC. It's particularly common, and we've worked with a lot of students, particularly around optometry and pharmacy, where that's quite a common thing. They'll ask for a BTEC and say, but you must also have an A-level in science. We know from level 3 programs that's very, very rarely going to be the case, but it can lead to a lot of disappointment for students. So it's really ensuring and encouraging them to check things very, very closely. As we go through, if you do have any questions, please do pop them in the chat and we'll come back to them when we see them. But we're going to move on to another little question now. We're going to think about contextual offers. We'll go on to talk about more about what these are, but we'll see what you know now. So which of these do you think can make a student eligible for a contextual offer? So we've got A, live in an area with low progression to higher education. B, have spent time in care. C, have had free school meals at some point during their schooling, or D, attend a school performing below the national average. Again, invite you to pop in the chat and we'll have a look at what we've got. So we've got A from 1, we've got an all of them as well. We didn't give that as an option, so that's been a little bit cheeky there, I think. Should we give a few more seconds, see if any more come through? So let's have a look. And so, well done, Joe. It is indeed all of them. It's that one of those devilishly tricky questions where all the answers are correct. So yes, all of these can make you eligible for a contextual offer. And Cerise is going to go into a little bit more detail about what contextual offers are.
Yeah. Basically, these have been around for a while, although we have noticed that more recently, there's definitely been an increase in the amount of contextual admission offers made. And so where in the past, if universities were looking at attracting students, they might have maybe done an unconditional offer. There has been sort of more of a move really to these contextualised offers. So these tend to be given if students are, say, looking at applying to university from particular postcode areas where perhaps there's maybe not much progression traditionally onto HE. So it's trying to sort of, I suppose, give them an offer which is going to encourage them, maybe entice them, make them think, look at that offer a little bit more. So what you'll find is that the universities will be deciding what criteria they want to consider, and we've got some examples that I'm going to come to shortly, and it's slightly different between each one. I think one of the key messages here to think about is students don't need to provide additional information for this. So sometimes students will be like, well, what do I need to put on my form to make sure to find out if I would be eligible for one of these contextual offers? The answer is the student doesn't need to. You who are providing the reference, that is something that you may look at putting in your reference. So kind of that contextual information you probably do in terms of have they joined your sixth form or your college from maybe a school that has low progression, you know, onto university. That would be something that would be a good place to put in the opening bit there. You know, at your school or college, have they been in receipt maybe of school meals? Are they in receipt of a bursary, something like that? So there are things that you could do that you could add there within the reference, but from a student's point of view, when you're supporting your students with their UCAS applications, it isn't something that they need to worry about. The universities will pull that information from the information that they've got there on the form. Obviously, from the student's point of view themselves, the contextual offer from them is likely to be that it's going to lead to that reduced offer, and that reduced offer can vary, so it can sometimes be a couple of UCAS grades lower, and so it can make a real difference between whether applying to a particular university, particularly if it's maybe going to be, say, one of their aspirational choices. It could be that difference between them, it being realistic and the student being made an offer or not, depending on their predicted grades. So in terms of examples of things that they're likely to see, I'm just going to start off with Nottingham here. So, you know, when you're supporting a student and they're wanting to know, say, over the summer, well, would I be eligible for one of these? It is easy for them to find. You can support your students, they can have a look themselves. If they've earmarked particular, say, universities that they're wanting to target, they can simply just, you know, go onto Google, like in the case of this one, put in Nottingham contextual offers and it will come up. So you can see a screenshot here in front of you, and you'll see here that for Nottingham they've put the postcode checker on there. So I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the other slide that quite often postcode and the number of people progressing onto HE from a particular postcode area can be quite an influential tool. So quite often that is something that they will look at. Again, things like you can see here for Nottingham, refugee status, if they've been in care, again can be something they've looked at, or indeed if they've taken part in any of the widening participation programs. So, you know, things maybe like, say, the Sutton Trust, or if they've linked and gone through to one of the summer schools or realising opportunities or those kind of programs. So all of those activities that they may have done, they could put in there. Obviously, for something like realising opportunities, Sutton Trust, they would put that part in their UCAS application. So in the additional information section, they would be detailing that there. And again, that's where the universities will pull that information from. So say the student doesn't need to explicitly put anything in the personal statement. I mean, they may choose to, because there may be a number of benefits, and we'll come on to personal statements in a moment. But as I say, the universities will get that. So that's kind of a snapshot of Nottingham, but you'll see with the next example coming up for Manchester that they're looking at different things. So they've still got those factors we've looked at earlier, but you can see here kind of this point of difference where Manchester is looking at considering the school's performance. So that's where, as I mentioned earlier, it could be good practice if you don't already to include sort of the school's performance in the reference there. So it just kind of gives that contextual information for them. So you can see also on here, students should have a look. So the example here shows how a contextual admissions can affect the different phases of the application. So they can look at things like the interview, impact on things like they can look at GCSE requirements, that kind of thing as well. So that's kind of a snapshot of the Manchester one. And the other one I just wanted to share with you today was the University of Sheffield one. So you can see here they've got quite an extensive list on here that they've put up. So again, that is slightly different. They've got things, for example, like you'll see here, say the EPQ that's on there, some additional qualifications in the top. So for example, if any of your students are, say, doing an EPQ, they might find that they get an offer at 1 grade lower. Or again, you can see on here priority given to students who are on, say, free school meals. I would take this opportunity to say in this session that you'll see on the screen here things like, say, disrupted studies, things like that. That is something different. So that is different to the contextual offers. So that you would normally filling out that disrupted studies form if there's other considerations and things. So it is slightly different, but I think for ease of navigating their page, Sheffield have put it all on one page there, so it's just to be aware of that. Okay, so that's contextual offers. So we're going to move on to choices and personal statements now. Just a kind of a little quiz just to get you thinking about this part of the delivery and the CPD here. So approximately how many different higher education providers are there in the UK? So do you think it's A, 50, B, 150, C, 250, or D, 350? If I could just invite you to pop your answers in chat, or as I say, if you are joining us via the recording, just take a moment, have a think what you would have put in the chat there. So I can see I've got a C coming in there. So someone's saying 350, another 350, yeah. So it looks like people are going for that higher end of the scale in terms of the providers. So I will reveal that you are absolutely right. So obviously 350, that is a lot of different colleges or universities for students to be having a look at. So this is why the bit we're coming on to now around you supporting them making their choices is really key. With so many sort of courses to choose from, so many university or colleges for them to look from, obviously trying to narrow it down to just those 5 choices can be sort of quite, can seem quite overwhelming sometimes for students, particularly if they're going for really popular choices. So obviously if they're keen in there something like, say, psychology or law or business, they're going to get a whole raft of different courses. So obviously it's supporting students in finding the right tools to implement to help them sort of narrow down the right course for them. If you haven't booked already, we do a number of HEPA sessions as well on how to make a successful UCAS application and how to choose the right course and institution. So, you know, your Y12 students may benefit from attending one of those sessions as well if you feel they need a little bit of extra help with that. But basically, you know, we would recommend at this time you're encouraging students to be kind of actively researching the courses. So Dan mentioned earlier, obviously the UCAS hub, which went live yesterday. Obviously on that, students have got that Discover tool on there, which is a great way for them to start researching. They can record their notes on there of what they've done. And it's also got on there, you mentioned UCAS tariff points as well. It's got the UCAS tariff calculator tool on that hub as well. So again, it's a really good place for students to start logging all the stuff. It may be that As an institution, you yourself have alternative platforms that your students can use. So perhaps you've signed up for things like Unifrog, maybe using the START programme. Again, they've got some fantastic resources on there for students to start looking at. And indeed, UCAS itself has, so students can start looking at, well, which course is going to be best for me? Where should I go? Now is also the time, if your students haven't already, to be encouraging them to go on open days. Thankfully, most of these are now back in person, so students can benefit from actually going onto a campus and really getting, you know, that feel of what it's like to be on a campus environment. I suppose one of the benefits of the aftermath of COVID maybe is there are still a lot of online resource there. So most of the universities have still got those like come and chat to one of our graduates and things like that on there. So again, it's a really nice way if students aren't quite sure which university or which course, they can use that for there. And obviously by going on those open days, it's a fantastic opportunity for students to start going to subject talks. So again, it's going to really help them decide which course as well, not just the university they want to go to. So obviously the key message really is to kind of start this research early, get themselves in a strong position. So as I say, we do in those other sessions, we encourage them to start working on the personal statement and finalising that application over the summer months. So in terms of personal statement advice and the structure of that, we would recommend to make sure that students have got the broadest appeal for those universities that are going to be looking at their UCAS personal statement, that they look at focusing at least 80% on there, showing that they are, as we've described here, preparedness for the course. So this is information which is directly relevant to the course that they are applying for. And I've got some examples of what this might look like and the kind of things that students might draw upon in order to evidence this in their personal statement to a university. And then the remaining 20% would be those wider skills, but obviously still that focus on highlighting those skills that they've got. So as you can see on this next slide here, I'm just going to kind of give a little bit more context for this. So the things that are popping up, you can see on the screen here, these are examples of kind of extracurricular activities. So this is kind of that general 20% part. So again, obviously depending on what a student is applying for, this may have more or less emphasis. So for example, organising an event, if a student is applying for like you know, a business related course, events management, something like that, clearly that is going to have more relevance than if they're not applying for something like that. And again, things like talent competitions, if they're sort of going down more of a performing arts course. But generally the things that you can see on the screen here are the kind of things that students could put down, which are going to sort of show they've done that, those extracurricular activities outside. The 80% would be made up of the supercurricular activities that are kind of flashing up on the screen now. So these are the kind of things really that students should be focusing on over the next couple of months over the summer. So things like if they haven't signed up already, hopefully they will have already signed up for things like maybe a summer school, they could include that in there. For those courses that Dan was talking about earlier, those kind of allied healthcare ones, which, you know, they're going to be sort of specifying they want certain experience. Again, obviously students are going to need to get that in over the summer. Those taster sessions they've gone to, they could put that there. All that additional reading that is going to evidence to the admissions tutor they've gone above and beyond the curriculum. So particularly applying for those competitive courses, they're going to expect them to have done what's required on the A-level course. It's what have they done in addition to that. So that could be additional reading. What have they learned from that? How is it relevant? How has it prepared them in, you know, that readiness for the course that we're applying for, but also completing the MOOCs. Again, if you're using something like, say, Unifrog, for example, you'll have got a whole list of those. So, you know, we've got a useful slide coming up at the end, but things like our Future Learn, they'll be able to complete those online learning courses, which is really going to evidence to the admissions tutor that they've gone kind of above and beyond.
Lovely. So I'm going to take over for a bit, and now I don't want to bore you with loads of research, but there's lots and lots of stuff written about personal statements and lots of sort of contrasting advice and historic advice that's given out. So I thought it'd just be useful to highlight some research that was done. This is by the Sutton Trust, who are sort of champions of widening participation in this country. And they've done some research into the personal statement, and there's a couple of quotes here. So teachers' views about what makes a good personal statement are often far from consistent with admissions tutors' views. There's often a bit of a disconnect between what sort of school staff think is a good personal statement and what admissions tutors are looking for. And that admissions tutors really tend to value focused and sustained analysis of a specific topic of interest, rather than broad statements about a subject or attempts to make the statement more personal. So if we flick back to that last slide, a student could have done all of these things, but if they just list that on their personal statement, it shows nothing about them as a person, and it shows nothing about what they've learned. What admissions tutors really want is students to almost give themselves that freedom of that personal statement to actually spend a good amount of that characters reflecting and analysing what they've learned and showing those abilities that have come through that. It's easy to say you've developed communication skills, but if you can show how you've developed those skills, you're giving that evidence to a tutor. So it's really important that you're not afraid to let a student personal statement maybe be slightly different to what you're used to, and maybe a little bit more academic than we maybe think it should be when we see the word personal in the title of that statement. That personality, that personalness comes through their reflections, comes from their personal experiences, rather than it having to be all about sort of them as a person. It's their experiences and their reflections on that. The link is obviously in the chat, sorry, not in the chat, on the slide there. We can share these slides if we need, and we can put the link in the YouTube recording. It is very interesting, just 4-page research, which can help you sort of get a sense of what admissions tutors look for. But to sum that up, so what a personal statement should be doing, headline thing, it should be showing admissions tutors why they're suitable for that course. It should be showcasing those relevant achievements, strengths and capabilities. Again, if we think about that slide with all those different things on, if a student's done all of those, that's fantastic, but there's no way they can fit that into one personal statement. So they need to highlight those relevant ones. And for some students, they really struggle with sort of almost ditching content that they think is really great and shows them off well. It's actually not that relevant to the course they want to do. So it does need to be very focused. It needs to back those claims up with those evidence, that analysis and that reflection. They're the things that set a good personal statement and a great personal statement apart, is that analysis and that reflection. Obviously, it should reflect positivity and enthusiasm for the course. If they've done all that research and they've found the courses they want to do, hopefully they are still positive and enthusiastic about it. And a very, very basic thing, it should have no spelling or grammar mistakes. Obviously, when a student spent a lot of time on a personal statement, their eyes maybe get a bit tired to it. If you, as a teacher or an advisor, can be that pair of fresh eyes to help spot that, or encourage them to get a family member or a friend to read that over and pick out the things that they've maybe not been able to see because they've spent so much time on it. So we're going to go on to talk about predicted grade. So this is another hugely important part of a student's UCAS application, and it's a part of the application they don't really have a great deal of control over. They are not responsible for putting those predicted grades into their UCAS application. That is the responsibility of yourselves as school staff and as college staff. And as important as everything we've talked about up to now is, the predicted grades are, in most cases, still that primary piece of information that universities are going to use to decide whether a student receives an offer or not, or decide whether they get an interview or not. So it's a really important piece of information. And as I said, that's something that they are not responsible for inputting into that UCAS form. Obviously, they are responsible for their performance in your classes and in their courses in terms of what's informing that predicted grade, but they don't themselves put it into UCAS. So when we talk about predicted grades, you will have processes in your schools and your sixth forms and your colleges. They are different from sort of other grades that would be reported. So they should be aspirational, but still achievable. And a key point is they are likely to be a little bit higher than working grades that might be reported home sort of every half term or every term, because they are what a student can potentially achieve on their best day. So this is just a quote from the UCAS site. So a predicted grade is the grade that the school or college believes that the student can achieve in positive circumstances. So if that student has had a great night's sleep, they've had a great breakfast, it's a nice sunny day, they're feeling great, they have a really good exam, what can they achieve in that circumstance? So it needs to be that very, very positive view of what they can achieve, because it gives them a real good chance of sort of being in that offer making pool, and being in that sort of ballpark of meeting those predicted grades. So they will usually be slightly higher than those working grades or those current working grades. So just a few do's and don'ts around this. Lots of good practice goes on, but a key thing is that predicted grades should be a topic of conversation. A student has to know what they're predicted. It can't be this hidden piece of information that we kind of keep from students. They have to know what they're going to be predicted, or at least the ballpark they're going to be predicted, because that's going to inform the courses they can apply for. And so teachers should be willing to discuss these grades with students, and as well they should be keen or willing to change those grades if the student makes exceptional progress. We know a lot of schools will potentially predict grades before the summer of year 12, but obviously those grades might not go off to UCAS until January, so potentially 6 months later a student can make huge strides over that time. So it shouldn't be something that once it's predicted, that's it, it's done. Until that grade goes to UCAS, it can be revisited. So if you see a student who suddenly just comes back in September and is flying, you should be willing to revisit that predicted grade. And as I say, the students need to know what they are so that they know what they're working with in terms of entry requirements. Consistency is incredibly important, so predicted grades need to be awarded consistently across all subjects and all departments in your institution. A student shouldn't be disadvantaged if a different class of the same subject has a more generous teacher. So there does need to be a bit of data-driven approach to this. It needs to be a slightly consistent approach so that students aren't unfairly advantaged or disadvantaged. And then a real key point, obviously we've talked about they should be aspirational, but they have to be achievable. So we know for linear A levels, you know, for most of them, all those exams are at the end, and so there is no sort of existing grade that will limit what they can get. But we know for vocational qualifications, they'll be doing coursework throughout the year, and they will have grades for that are set in stone. So obviously you cannot predict students a grade above what they can physically achieve in that course. So it has to be something that can actually be achieved. Otherwise, we're just setting students up to fail. And then some predicted grade don't. So they should not be influenced by unreasonable pressure, be that from students or their parents and carers or any other staff in your school. Obviously, we said there should be a conversation with a student, but a student cannot put unnecessary pressure on you to change that grade, and nor can their parents or carers, because it has to be from your professional judgment. As I said, they should be aspirational, achievable, but we shouldn't just be inflating grades just to meet the entry requirements of a course a student wants to apply for. Because if that student has no, in your professional opinion, has no realistic chance of achieving that grade, predicting them that grade doesn't actually help them, because whether you predict that grade or not, if that university wants that grade, the student has to achieve it. So if you don't think they can achieve that grade, then predicting them that grade doesn't do them any sort of favours in the long run. And then a little bit of a contentious one, but predicted grades should not be influenced by students' behaviour or background or any other form of bias. So they have to be objective. And the reason we bring this up, and again, is just to bring in a slight bit of research that's been done around widening participation. There is a lot of evidence that shows disadvantaged students receive lower predicted grades than their more privileged peers across all ability levels. And so there's lots and lots of research that's been done on this. And so it's just sort of recognising our own biases that we have and trying to take those out of that of the predicted grade process and make sure that they are objectively given to all of our students. So I'm going to hand back over to Therese, who's going to take us to the last little bit, which is on offers and next steps.
Yes, so we've just come to the end of the session now. So just in terms of what will happen once you've supported your students in applying, so it's likely they will get a conditional offer, and this is where obviously they're going to be asked by a university to either get specific grades, or it could be tariff points depending on the university they've applied to. It may have specific conditions in terms of certain grades that they have to have. So they're likely to get a conditional offer. A few may get an unconditional offer. We do have sort of a bit of a beware that we put on here around this, where we would suggest that you make students aware. Hopefully they're going to spend the next few weeks over the summer doing those open day visits, doing all that research that you're asking them to do, and obviously you don't want them to kind of throw that out of the window just because a university's come in and said, oh, put us first and we'll give you an unconditional offer, and then they've kind of wasted that. It is 3-4 years that they're going to be spending going to that university. So it's really important that it is the right university and the right course for them. And I guess the other bit just to sort of flag up to them as well with that is, you know, if they are looking at applying to university, hopefully with a view to improving their employability skills, their prospects in the future, you know, employers are going to be looking at the grades that they've got at GCSE as well, so they don't and at A level, so they don't want to be taking kind of the foot off the gas and thinking, oh no, it's fine. So and then obviously it may be that they're unsuccessful, in which case they could go through some of those dates I mentioned earlier, maybe whether that be like UCAS extra or clearing extra, for example. In terms of types of acceptance, once they've got all 5 offers in, they should then obviously choose their first choice. This would normally be that higher aspirational choice, and as the name would suggest, the insurance one must definitely have that lower entry requirement. Do make sure that your students have obviously visited that insurance choice and they do want to go. Because remember, if on results day they don't meet those specific conditions of their firm first choice, they would be expected to go to that insurance choice. So do make sure it is still somewhere, you know, that they want to go to. So if we could invite you to be typing any questions that you may have for us into the chat now, and we're just going to share on the screen here some of the websites that we feel will be useful for you to have a look at after this session. So again, these are different sites that you could use to help your students improve their applications there. So we'll just check if anyone's popped anything in the chat. Can't see any questions going in at the moment. I am aware that we are to time, so if I could just ask you, doesn't look like anyone's got any questions. So before we just wrap this session up, if we could invite you to just scan in the QR code if you have your phone handy, or just going into the chat now is the link there. We will be grateful if you could give us any feedback on the session today. But as there's no questions, I would like to take the opportunity to thank you for attending.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, if you want to get in touch with us, you can contact us through the website, through hepsi.org. Obviously, you've got your schools and colleges program managers and your HEPers. So if you want to contact us with any questions, obviously any sessions that you'd like us to come and deliver for your students, or any suggestions for future CPD, please just get in touch with us and we'll get back to you as soon as we can.